There is a particular kind of silence that comes before a horse vocalizes. A stillness, a held breath. And then the sound comes up from somewhere deep, and it is not a whinny, and it is not a scream. And if you have worked with horses long enough, you know immediately that something is wrong. I know that sound. I have known it for 28 years. The night Beverly called me, I could hear it through the phone before she said a single word. It was 2 a.m. November. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan. She said, "Susan, something is at the fence again." I was already reaching for my keys. I had been Beverly's veterinarian for 9 years. I had heard her voice in every kind of situation. A horse with colic at midnight, a difficult foaling in March mud, the kind of calls that are just part of the life out here. Her voice that night was different, not panicked. Beverly does not panic, but there was something underneath the words, a careful quality, like she was trying to describe something she did not yet have language for. I told her I was coming. I want to tell you about that drive before I tell you anything else. 8 miles north of my clinic, in the dark, in November, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. No streetlights, no other traffic, just the tree line on both sides of the road pressing in close, and my headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark, and the temperature gauge on my dash reading 19 degrees. There had been light snow earlier in the evening, a dusting. The road had that particular quality it gets in early winter, where the blacktop shows through in 2 tracks, and everything else is white and still. I have driven that road hundreds of times. I know every bend in it. I know where the deer cross, and where the road drops toward the creek, and where Beverly's mailbox catches the light just before her driveway. That night, for the first time in 28 years, the road felt different. I noticed that. I filed it away. I am a veterinarian. I notice things, and I file them away, and I try not to decide what they mean until I have more information. Beverly was standing on her porch when I pulled in. She had a flashlight and a barn coat over her night clothes. She pointed toward the paddock without saying anything. I could hear Duchess before I saw her. Not screaming. I want to be precise about this. Horses in genuine distress scream. This was not that. This was something lower. A sustained vocalization I can only describe as a horse that is trying to decide something, trying to read something it has not read before. She was moving along the south fence line, back and forth, steady, not frantic, the movement of an animal that is aware of something and is keeping its distance while staying alert to it. Ringo, the younger gelding, was standing still in the middle of the paddock, facing north. I stood at the paddock fence and looked north. The property ends at a cedar post fence line, maybe 200 feet from the barn. Beyond that, balsam fir. Dense. Old. The national forest starts right there and goes back 40 miles without a road through it. In my flashlight beam, I could see the fence posts. I could see the grass between the barn and the fence, silvered with frost. I could see the first line of trees. I could not see anything else. But Ringo was still facing north, still standing, still watching something I could not see. I stayed for an hour. Beverly made coffee. We stood in the barn doorway and watched the horses and listened to the forest. At some point, Ringo moved. He walked to the water trough. He drank. He went back to standing near Duchess. The vocalization stopped. By the time I left, both horses were quiet. I drove home in the dark, and I thought about what the horses had been responding to. because they had been responding to something. That much was not in question. Here is what Beverly told me when I came back in daylight. It had been happening for 3 weeks, not every night, but most nights. Something coming to the north fence line after dark and staying for a period of time and then leaving. She had first noticed it because of the grass. On the forest side of the fence, in a rough oval about 10 feet across, the grass had been pressed down, not broken, pressed, as if something large had been standing in one spot long enough to flatten the vegetation beneath it. The oval was 15 feet from the fence, not at the fence, not testing the fence. 15 feet back, in the tree-line shadow, at a consistent distance. I walked the fence line with Beverly that morning. The ground was hard with frost, but I could see the oval clearly. I could see where the grass had been compressed repeatedly, over time, in the same location. And I could see, in a soft patch near the base of a cedar post, a partial impression in the mud. Beverly had already found it. That was what she had described to me on the phone the week before. I crouched down and looked at it for a long time. Large, flat. 5 toes in the impression, splayed slightly. No claw marks. The depth of the heel was significant. Whatever had made it was heavy, much heavier than a person of normal build. I photographed it. I measured what I could measure. I documented it the way I document everything I want to remember accurately, without the distortion that memory applies to things it cannot categorize. Then I stood up and looked at the balsam fir. I have lived and worked in this country for 28 years. I know what lives in these woods: black bear, white-tailed deer, coyote, the occasional wolf since the population started recovering, bobcat, fisher. I have treated injuries caused by most of them at one point or another. I ran through the list methodically. The impression was not consistent with bear. Bear tracks show claw marks. The front and rear feet pattern of a bear is distinctive and not easily mistaken for anything else, even in a partial print. And bears do not stand upright in one location for extended periods of time. They investigate. They move. They are not patient animals. The size eliminated most of the other options immediately. I did not say out loud what I was thinking. I said, "Beverly, I want to set up a camera out here." She said, "I already did." We watched the footage in her kitchen. 14 nights recorded, 11 with a figure in the frame. Let me tell you what I saw. The camera was a trail camera, motion activated, mounted on one of the cedar fence posts. The footage was not high resolution. 2018, rural Michigan. Night vision doing the heavy work. Grainy. Timestamp in the corner. The kind of footage where you find yourself leaning toward the screen. On the first clip, movement at the tree line, and then stillness. A shape at the edge of the balsam, at the same distance from the fence I had measured that morning. 15 feet. Upright. I want to be careful here because I know how easy it is to see what you want to see in grainy night vision footage. I watched each clip multiple times. I watched for the characteristics that would tell me I was looking at a bear rearing up. The drop back to all fours, the rocking weight distribution, the head shape. None of those things were present. The shape was upright for the full duration of every clip. Consistent posture, head position stable. The way a person stands when they are looking at something, not the way a bear stands when it has been startled upright. The clips averaged just over 4 minutes each. 11 nights. 4 minutes of stillness. And then gone. What struck me first was not the shape itself. It was the head position. In the clips where the image was clearest, I could see that the head was oriented consistently toward the paddock, not scanning, not moving the way a deer moves when it is reading a scent trail, or the way a bear moves when it is investigating something new. Still, directed. The posture of an animal that has already identified what it is looking at and has settled in to observe it. On one clip from early December, the angle was slightly different. Beverly had adjusted the camera after a frost shifted the mounting post. In that clip, the shape was visible from a better angle, and I could see something I had not noticed before. The arms, or what I am going to call the arms, were not hanging loose. They were held slightly in front of the body, a relaxed position, but not passive. The posture of something that is alert, but not alarmed. Interested, but not agitated. I have seen that posture in animals. I have seen it in horses, standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. In dogs watching something they are not sure about. In cattle observing a new piece of equipment in a field. It is the posture of attention. On 3 of the clips, Duchess was visible at the far end of the paddock, standing. That particular quality of stillness that horses hold when they are processing something outside their experience, not fleeing, not vocalizing, just watching back. On one clip, Ringo approached the north fence. I watched this clip 4 times. He walked to the fence line and stopped. Stood there for approximately 30 seconds. His ears were forward. He was looking directly at the shape in the balsam fir. The shape did not move. And then Ringo turned and walked back to Duchess. And they stood together at the south end of the paddock for the rest of the clip. The shape watched him go. Did not follow. Did not shift toward the fence. Just watched. And then the clip ended. I went back to the footage a second time, alone, about a week later. Beverly had copied the files onto a thumb drive, and I watched them at my kitchen table after my last call of the day. Better light. No one talking. Just me and the screen. I was looking for something specific, though I could not have told you what. I found it on the 7th clip. It was a cold night, based on the timestamp. Late November. The frost was visible on the fence posts in the night vision, a white edge along the top of every cedar rail. The shape was in its usual position at the tree line. Still, head oriented toward the paddock, but the breath was visible. In cold enough air, exhalation shows up as vapor, even on night vision. I had not noticed it on earlier viewings because I had been looking at the shape itself, trying to read the posture and the proportions. On this clip, I was looking at the air around the shape, and I could see the breath. Slow, evenly spaced plumes of vapor rising from just below the head. Not rapid. Not the quick, shallow breathing of an animal that is stressed or has been running. Long and slow. The breathing of something that is completely calm. The breathing of something that has been standing in one place, in the cold, for a long time, and is in no particular hurry to be anywhere else. I watched that clip 3 times. I could not tell you why the breathing bothered me more than anything else I had seen on the footage. Maybe because it made the shape, whatever it was, feel suddenly and unmistakably alive in a way that the grainy outline alone had not. Calm. Patient. Breathing slow in the November cold. Watching. I sat back from Beverly's laptop. I said, "How long has this been happening?" She said, 6 weeks, I think. Maybe a little longer. I thought about what that meant in behavioral terms. A predator does not hold a fixed observation distance from prey for 6 weeks. Predators test boundaries. They identify the weakest animal and work toward access. They are always, in some way, closing the distance. This was the opposite of that. This was an animal that had chosen a distance and was respecting it. Not because it couldn't close it, because it wasn't. That kind of restraint is not instinct. Instinct pushes toward the food source. Whatever this was, something else was operating. I told Beverly not to interfere with it. She asked why. I said, because it has been here for 6 weeks and the horses are fine, and because you do not want to introduce a hostile variable into a situation you do not yet understand. She asked, "What do you think it wants?" I said, "I think it's curious about the horses. I think it's watching them the way I watch a new patient, trying to understand what they are." Beverly looked out her kitchen window at the paddock. She said, "That's a strange thing to think about." I said, "Yes, it is." Duchess settled down by mid-December. Beverly's camera still showed the figure, 2 or 3 nights a week. But Duchess had stopped pacing, stopped vocalizing in the night. She was eating normally again, sleeping normally again. I went out to the property one evening in January to check on her. Not a scheduled call. I had been driving past, and I turned in on an impulse. It was snowing lightly. The kind of fine, dry snow the Upper Peninsula gets in deep winter that falls almost without weight and settles on everything. Beverly wasn't home. I let myself through the gate the way I had 100 times before and walked to the paddock. Duchess was standing at the south end, Ringo beside her, both of them facing north. The snow was falling between me and the tree line. The cedars were white along their top branches. Beyond them, the balsam fir was dark, the way it always is, the kind of dark that doesn't change with the season. I stood with the horses for a few minutes. I did not see anything. But I understood, standing there in the January cold, why Duchess had stopped being afraid. She had run the calculation that I was still running. Horses are prey animals. They have been prey animals for millions of years. The part of the horse brain that evaluates threat is ancient and highly refined. Not sophisticated in the way human cognition is sophisticated, but for the specific task of reading danger, extraordinarily capable. Duchess had concluded, "This thing is strange. This thing is large. This thing is something I have no category for. And it is not going to come through the fence." She was right. Whatever was in the balsam fir, it never once came through the fence. The camera stopped getting footage in late February. I went back in April when the snow melt had softened the ground. It was a quiet morning. The balsam was dripping. The cedar posts along the fence were dark with moisture. The property had that particular early spring look the Upper Peninsula gets when the snow is finally going. Gray-brown and flattened, the color of things that have been compressed under ice for months, just beginning to remember what they are. I walked the full length of the north fence line. The oval in the grass had grown back. Whatever impression it had made over the fall and winter was already filling in. At the base of the tree line, where the canopy had sheltered a patch of ground from the deepest freeze, I found a track. One clear track in soft earth. I crouched down and looked at it for a long time before I did anything else. Then I photographed it from 6 angles. I measured it carefully. I noted the depth, the toe spread, the absence of claw marks, the shape of the heel impression. 15.5 inches long. The stride to the next partial impression, partially collapsed by meltwater, was approximately 52 inches. That is not a human stride. I stood at the edge of the balsam fir for a long time. 40 miles of forest behind that tree line. No road through it. Old growth and second growth and swamp and drainage, and the kind of country that has been largely undisturbed since before anyone was keeping track. I thought about the weight of that, not just the distance, the density, the kind of terrain that does not give up what it holds. I thought about what it would take to return to the same spot for months, to cover whatever distance it covered to get there, through country with no trails, in the dark, in a Michigan winter, to stand in the cold at 19 degrees, at 20 below, with the wind coming off the lake, night after night, to watch horses you had perhaps never seen before, or had never seen close enough to study, to learn over weeks what they were, how they moved, what their rhythms were, to be curious enough and patient enough and careful enough to never once cross the line that would have changed everything. I don't know what it was. I am a veterinarian. I work with what I can observe and measure. I do not make claims I cannot support. What I can tell you is what I observed. And what I observed was an animal that demonstrated more restraint and more patience and more careful attention to the effect of its own presence than most of the people I have met in 28 years of practice. I said something out loud before I walked back to my truck. I don't know why. There was no one there. But I said it. I said, I hope the horses were interesting. And then I drove to my next call. Beverly still farms that land. I still drive that road. Last winter, she mentioned, the way you mentioned something you are not sure how to classify, that sometimes Duchess stands at the south end of the paddock at night, ears forward, facing north, not distressed, not vocalizing, just watching the tree line the way she watched it in the fall of 2018. Aware. I have thought about Duchess more than I have thought about the shape on the trail camera, because Duchess did something that I think is genuinely difficult. She encountered something completely outside her experience, something large and unknown and outside every category she had, something that, by any reasonable measure, she had every right to be afraid of indefinitely. And she watched it long enough and carefully enough to understand that being unfamiliar is not the same as being dangerous. Most of us never get there. We decide what something is before we have enough information. We respond to the unfamiliar as if unfamiliar and threatening are the same thing. Duchess did not do that. She watched, she waited, she assessed. And she was right. Whatever was in those trees wasn't there to hurt her. It was there for the same reason I have spent 28 years driving through the dark to look at animals I have never seen before. It was curious. And curious, in my experience, is almost never the thing you need to be afraid of.